This is joint research between Michał and myself. There's a very obvious division of labour. I work in the German archives, Michał works in the Polish archives. This is a more complicated project, and ideally we would like to match names with descendants. So it's not only a question of reconstructing who are the actual victims whose brains were taken to Berlin and beyond, but we would also, it would be wonderful if we could find a link to families. So this is about, it's an unknown chapter about 211 brains collected by a very prominent brain researcher, Julius Hallervorden, and how brains from Warsaw and other locations in Poland, here particularly Lublin, were taken to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Brain Research, and then beyond. There is an afterlife in this story. And we found so far that at least 137 of these brains came from autopsies which were supervised by German military pathologists in Warsaw and Lublin. The majority being 128 brains from the Chiste hospital before the hospital went into the ghetto. And German military pathologists, and here we have been reconstructing the network of these military pathologists from a very, very large number of autopsy reports from the German Federal Military Archives in Freiburg. And the autopsies are filed under the cause of death, which makes our lives complicated. I think it's well established that the Germans had a deep phobia of typhus, fleck fever, which they represented as a Juden fever. But there is a neglected role of German medical officers in shaping anti-Jewish policies in occupied Poland. And so the question is, what was their role in terms of dissecting Jewish victims and transferring their brains as objects of scientific interest to Berlin, which I think is remarkable. So, Michał, now we're a team.
Yes, so I will now talk about the activities of German army pathologists in the Jewish hospitals in Warsaw and Lublin. Right, so the Chiste Jewish Hospital in Warsaw was one of the biggest and best equipped hospitals in the whole of Poland, and before the Second World War it was largely supported by municipal funds, and until December 1939, when the management and financing was taken over by the Warsaw Judenrat under Adam Czerniaków. And when the typhus epidemic broke out around the same time, in late 1939, the Germans ordered mandatory hospitalization of all suspected typhus cases, and at the same time the Germans banned Jews from accessing non-Jewish hospitals, which meant that all adult Jews were treated in the Chiste Jewish Hospital. Unlike in Warsaw, the Jewish hospital in Lublin was a rather smaller institution and didn't have an infectious diseases ward. And so Jewish typhus patients were treated together with non-Jews in the municipal St. John of God Hospital in Lublin. But when the typhus epidemic started in February 1940, according to the literature, a separate Jewish epidemic ward was opened in a municipal orphanage which was adjacent to the hospital. And this building was, this ward was still financed by the municipality, but the local Judenrat provided the equipment and paid for mattresses, bed linen, and underwear for the patients. So when the Warsaw Ghetto was sealed in November 1940, the Chiste Hospital, which is in the Warsaw suburb of Chiste, was outside the walls of the ghetto, and it remained there until January 1941, when it was moved to different buildings inside. And also the municipal hospital in Lublin was outside the borders of the ghetto, but eventually a separate Jewish epidemic hospital was opened inside in 1941. So during this time, German pathologists had regular access to Jewish hospitals in Warsaw and Lublin until they were transferred into the ghettos. And in the Czyste hospital, there were at least 46 documented autopsies conducted by German army pathologists between January and December 1940. And meanwhile, in Lublin, German pathologists dissected at least 26 people in the 26 Jews in the municipal hospital and at least one person in the Jewish hospital in Lublin. However, the reconstruction of the German military pathology networks in German-occupied Poland is difficult because of fragmentary sources, constant organizational changes and shifting of the personnel. But we managed to discover that in December 1939 there were German army pathology labs open in Warsaw, Lublin, Krakow and Radom, so there was one lab for each of the 4 districts of the general government. So the Warsaw lab was initially staffed by Gerhard Tepisch, who conducted at least 4 autopsies in the Czyste hospital, and Karl Benne, who conducted at least 37 autopsies. And those brains of typhus victims that were dissected by Benne and Tepisch were then sent to Julius Hallervorden via the Military Medical Academy in Berlin. And Benne is a quite interesting character because according to Dr. Jakub Penson, who was the head of the typhus ward in the Czyste hospital, Benne was among all the German doctors who were frequently visiting the Czyste hospital, he was the only one who actually treated Jewish physicians in a humane way. And Benne was not a Nazi party member, and both before and after the war he was a chief pathologist in the Catholic hospital in Hamburg. And Benne and Tepisch were then replaced in Warsaw by another team of German medical officers, Edmund Randerath and Walter Herzog. And unlike Benne, Randerath was a committed supporter of the Nazi regime. And before the war, he became a professor of pathology at the Medical Academy in Düsseldorf. And in November 1940, he dissected at least 3 Jews who died of typhus in the Czyste hospital, and then transferred two brains to Hallervorden in Berlin. And Randerath was then intended for the proposed German university in Krakow, but those plans were cancelled because of the war with the Soviet Union. So instead, Randerath was sent to the Eastern Front, where he served as a consulting pathologist of the 2nd Panzer Army. However, after the war, he was appointed professor of pathology at the University of Heidelberg and later became the dean of the medical faculty and finally the rector of this oldest university in Germany. And in 1960, he was elected as president of the German Society for Pathology. And Randerath's deputy in the pathology lab in Warsaw was Walter Herzog from the University of Göttingen. And the 2 autopsies conducted by him in December 1940 were the last documented instances of German pathologists dissecting bodies in the Czyste hospital. So paradoxically, the transfer of Jewish brains from Warsaw ends at the time when a second and much larger typhus epidemic breaks out in the ghetto. So in turn, in the army pathology lab in Lublin, that was staffed by also a team of 2 pathologists, Friedrich Bemke and his assistant Dr. Brandenburg. And Bemke was a pathologist from the University of Gießen, and he was a member of NSD, the Nazi Party, and the SA. And Bemke and Brandenburg together conducted at least 17 autopsies of Jews who died in the municipal hospital in Lublin. And brains of 2 victims that were dissected, who died of typhus and were dissected by Bemke, were then sent to Hallervorden in Berlin. And in 1944, Bemke was appointed professor of pathology at the University of Berlin. And even though he was denied this post after 1945, he became the director of the pathology department of the municipal hospital in Dortmund. And like Randerath, he was elected president of the German Society for Pathology. And Bemke and Brandenburg left Lublin in September 1940 and were replaced by another team of pathologists. And Dr. Borchers conducted at least 4 autopsies, and his assistant, Dr. Hartmann, at least 5 autopsies in the St. John of God Hospital in Lublin. And Hartmann also dissected the body of a Jewish woman from Nałęczów, which is a town 30 kilometers northwest of Lublin. And she died of ulcerative endocarditis in the Jewish hospital in Lublin. And brains of 7 Jews dissected by Borchers and Hartmann were then sent to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for brain research in Berlin. So both the Warsaw and Lublin army pathology labs were closed by the end of 1941, kind of following the relocation of German troops to the Eastern Front. So I would now like to draw your attention to some interesting documents.
Yeah, go quickly.
And according to the existing literature, as I mentioned, there was a separate Jewish ward in the municipal hospital in Lublin, but we discovered original records in the hospital, in the state archive in Lublin, and so this is a page from the patient register from the municipal hospital in Lublin, and so here you can see this column shows typhus flamisty for typhus. In the other column you can see the age and religion. So you can see Roman Catholics and here.
Sharpen the project. We can't sharpen.
Yeah. Anyway, so you can see there's religion indicated there, and so you can see that. And then in the first column from the left, you can see Roman numbers. So you can see that both the Jewish patient Moshe Stern and the Catholic patients are in the same ward, number 6. So possibly this kind of separate Jewish ward existed only on paper, because in January 1940 the Odilo Globocnik, the SS leader, kind of gave an order banning Jews from non-Jewish hospitals, so maybe that's why they kind of set it up administratively, but in practice they were still admitted to the same hospital. So here's another document. So this is actually an autopsy protocol of the same person, Moshe Stern, who was dissected by Dr. Bemke in Lublin in April 1940. And so here you can see the signature of both Bemke and Brandenburg. And then on the right side you can see that his brain was kind of requested for microscopic examination by Professor Schurman from the Military Medical Academy in Berlin. Here is an autopsy protocol from the Czyste Jewish Hospital. This was a Jewish man called Isaac Wesołek. We'll come back to him later. He was dissected by Dr. Benne in Warsaw. And on the right you can see another document. This is a letter from Dr. Benne concerning a histopathological examination of organs, brains and other organs of a suspected typhus case. And those organs were sent to the German Army Pathology Lab in Warsaw by Dr. Józef Stein. And Józef Stein was a Jewish convert to Christianity of the Lutheran denomination, and before the war he worked as a pathologist in the Holy Ghost Hospital in Warsaw, and then when Germans imposed the racial segregation of hospitals, he was reassigned to the Czyste Hospital, where he took over the pathology department, later also became the hospital's director. And so we found out that at least 11 brains that were supplied to Hallervorden via German military pathologists were actually dissected by Stein himself. And there are also 56 brains who were supplied to Hallervorden. We don't know who dissected them, because the autopsy protocols didn't have a name of the pathologist, but they were possibly undertaken under German supervision by Stein's assistants. Those assistants were Henrik Pfennigstein, who survived the war and later emigrated to Canada, and the other assistant was Siegfried Gilde, who was a really tragic person. He was actually a German Jewish physiologist from Stettin, and then he escaped from the Nazis to the Soviet Union, and then there he was arrested and handed over to the Germans. So basically, he was handed over to the Germans, found a job in the Warsaw ghetto, the Czyste Hospital, and then he was killed. So yeah, now we'll kind of
we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay, so these specimens are going to this Kaiser Wilhelm Institute near Berlin, and they are part of a special unit for research into war damages of the central nervous system. Then there is a whole post-war history of this collection They're in fact exchanged with at the time of the Russian zone, and they move to the west. The West Germans give radiation research equipment and spectrometers to the East Germans, but we could still find, the question is, what happened to the brains? We can trace them to the mid-1960s, to Frankfurt, but in 2018 I began a process of questioning which produced interesting results, because the brains of Weselek and Isidor Schlachtur were still in the Schausammlung, in the demonstration collection of the Edinger Institute in Frankfurt, which is the university's main neurological institute. And the University of Frankfurt were not happy by the fact that they still have brains of Jews taken from Warsaw in 1940. And there was then, I think it's nearly farcical, they then said, well, we don't own these brains. The Max Planck Society owns the brains. Remove them, please, which the Max Planck Society duly did. But you can see that these are large, wet specimens. This is Weselek's brain, and this is Schlachtur's brain. There is now a question. What should happen to these brains? Bury them, ceremonially, a Jewish burial. But where? Not with the main specimen collection of the Max Planck Society, because that would be in a Christian burial ground. So, with the Frankfurt Jewish community, with the Warsaw Jewish community, it will not be our decision, but this is, or should they be kept as mementos of the past, of a past atrocity? Because the problem is, once you bury a specimen, you then lose it. There is a transformation, which is what happened, for example, with specimens in Natzweiler of the 86 Jews. You had the stomach contents. The rabbi didn't want stomach contents particularly. They were potato peelings, and they are evidence of the mistreatment of Jewish victims. But they were forced on the rabbi, and the specimen, which was pretty remarkable, is lost. I think we should stop there. So thank you very much for your attention.